Right, we're gonna give it 30 more seconds while people continue to join. But in the meantime, I want to introduce myself. I'm Maria Luisa Hernandez. I'm a program manager at Enduring Earth. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, which is hosted by the Global Environment Facility, the Latin American and Caribbean Network of Conservation Trust Funds, the Consortium of African Funds for the Environment, and Enduring Earth. Together, these organizations publish the report that we are presenting today and that you can download by scanning the QR code on your screen. This was launched in October at the Biodiversity COP in Cali, and we will be sharing the link in the chat a few times, so you will be able to access it in different ways. And we're very excited for today's discussion. To guide us, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Paulina Arroyo, who is the director of the Global Portfolio at Enduring Earth. Paulina, over to you.
Thank you, Maria Luisa, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're calling us or joining our webinar this morning. It's great to see over 80 people joining from everywhere around the world. We're very fortunate to have a stellar panel today to discuss how conservation trust funds are driving innovation in conservation finance and have really been resilient partners to many of us in this event. I'd like to introduce Adriana Moreira, a PhD from Harvard, is a biologist and expert in environmental issues and sustainable development with over 20 years of experience in natural resource management, rural development, and climate change in Latin America and Africa. And she's currently the head of partnerships division at the GEF and a wonderful ally who I've worked on several adventures with in moving conservation finance. Also with us, René González Montagut, a biologist with a PhD from Harvard, has driven conservation efforts in Mexico through the Mexican Fund for Conservation of Nature, leading environmental funds and managing financing for the Global Environment Facility and the Green Climate Fund. Also with us is Zdenka Piskulic, a wonderful colleague and friend, CEO of Enduring Earth, a collaboration aimed at protecting 600 million hectares using the Project Finance for Permanence model. She previously led Costa Rica Forever and chaired REDLAC and Pacifico Foundation and was the chair of the Conservation Finance Alliance's Conservation Funds Working Group. Carl Bressot is a long-standing director of Mount Mulanje Conservation Trust based in southeastern Malawi. It was an originally GEF capitalized fund, so fascinating to hear that history, and has dedicated 20 years of the conservation of Mount Mulanje, working with both small organizations and large donors such as USAID and GEF. To set the stage for this event, as Maria Luisa mentioned, in the COP16 last year, we launched a publication on in collaboration with the GEF and the REDLAC Cafe and other conservation trust funds with Enduring Earth on how conservation trust funds are driving progress for nature. This is a retrospective that has not been done in a while over the last few years of achieving the global biodiversity framework. And many of these GEF capitalized funds with other key donors are implementing project finance for permanence initiatives such as Costa Rica Forever and Arbor for Life. Over the last 30 years, the GEF alone has provided more than $320 million to 66 CTFs around the world, which would then leveraged more than double of funding for donors. And so today's conversation in this very challenging global setting that we have, we are really excited to discuss how this legacy provides a solid foundation for us to have even more impact around the world, and hopefully will provide a lot of pockets of hope as we move forward, kicking off this year. So I'll start with the first question to Adriana. If GEF has been instrumental in seeding and supporting conservation trust funds, which I'll say CTFs for short, how does GEF's current strategy reflect the growing importance of CTFs in achieving global conservation goals like 30 by 30?
Thank you, Paulina. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from cold Washington, D.C. Pleasure to be here with you today and discuss this subject that is very close to my heart. And at the JEF, we're very proud, actually, to have supported the creation of these very important institutions in the global framework for long-term support of biodiversity conservation efforts. And when I use the word institutions, I think that's one of the first aspects I want to touch, Paulina, in our strategy, because the JEF has been, the premier financier and the grandfather of all funds, I would say, in environment since Rio 92. And one of its legacy, particularly in the biodiversity arena, has been the creation of these institutions and the support to the existing institutions and in this arena, because these institutions have grown and contribute to the fabric of civil society organizations in their own countries and regions. And this is goes beyond any direct funneling of funds that they have done a superb work in this area. So looking into the future, the JEF has been really strengthening its approach. We have recently created over the last year or so a new partnership of the JEF and the Conservation Trust Funds globally. We are focusing on working with the networks in Latin America, Africa, Asia, Pacific. And this is ongoing work. Now we are going towards the end of the JEF 8 cycle of funding, and we're starting the discussions on the JEF 9 strategy. And we have as an overarching strategy the global biodiversity framework, to guide us on this. But to the JEF, this continues to be a central partnership for supporting, and also our direct support to the Enduring Earth is also telling another aspect of this partnership, particularly when we talk about devising mechanisms for long-term support of protected area systems, local communities, indigenous peoples, and all the community-based organizations that are the steerers and our partners in conserving biodiversity globally. So creating institutions, ensuring steady flow of funds and long-term financing mechanisms, supporting government policies towards biodiversity conservation, and empowering and becoming partners with local communities and indigenous peoples. This always has been, but continues to be central to the JEF agenda, and will be even more enhanced as we move towards the next cycle, the JEF 9 cycle of programming. And just to add a very, last thought on this first intervention, I want to say that these institutions, they have grown. We're very proud because they have gone way beyond the initial JEF seeding. They are now institutions on their own. Some of them have become JEF implementing agencies. Others have been executing partners in very important projects throughout the 144 countries that the JEF support. So this is an ongoing partnership, and we're looking forward to strengthen this partnership and making it even more strong and with this long-term vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana, for that angle of importance of institutionality, which is a great segue to René, from your perspective, Fondo Mexicano being such an important leader in conservation trust funds in Latin America and around the world. and as an early recipient of the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund for Mexico 30 by 30 project, it would be wonderful to hear your insights on how Fondo Mexicano is planning to use those funds in particular to advance biodiversity conservation at scale.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Paulina, and thank you, Redlag, GF, Cafe, Enduring Earth for this panel. This is a real honor to be with these friends that have worked on the same issues and same dreams for many years. The Mexican Fund for the Conservation of Nature is already 30 years old. And just building on what Adriana said, we've been building experience, working together with the governments, with the communities, and with the civil society. So it's really creating a social fabric that over the years has been consolidated, especially in protected areas. And the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund is this new fund that was created by the GF after the decision in 2022 on just speeding up the funding for conservation, especially for biodiversity. And in that respect, building on the experience and on the institutions that GF had created made sense. So, in 2023, it was not last year, it was a year and a half ago, we started this relationship with the GF that many of us were born with GF funds, but we had not really worked together. So we started doing this and started saying, well, if you really want to scale up and you want to expedite the funding and make sure that the funds, those financial resources are transformed into natural resources at the time and speed that we need for the environmental challenges, we needed to work together. And so, even though we worked together in the past, now it's it's escalating this partnership, and it's very exciting. So in terms of the GBFF, the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, we are going to start deploying those funds soon. It's been really, and usually it took like 3 years to get funds from the GF. Now it's taken us 3 months to actually sign. It's just amazing, and of course it builds on a lot of experience from the past. And what we will do is 3 things. One of them is we will facilitate and administer the funds for the National Commission for Protected Areas, which is the technical leader of the proposal in Mexico. And the idea is to actually make sure that the effective management of the 232 protected areas of Mexico takes place. So the government needs to double its budget for protected areas, and it's already on the way to do so. And so they are really thinking of creative mechanisms, and there's funds to actually help the government do this. The second component is to actually, while this occurs, have some funds that make sure that deforestation and degradation of habitat in the protected areas does not occur while the government is increasing its funding. So that's where a lot of partners, including Enduring Earth and definitely the GF and the Green Climate Fund and, the German government, all are pitching in to actually make sure that Mexico, which has 1.4% of the land surface, but 12% of the biodiversity in the world, we don't lose even 1% of that, So we're working on that. And the third component is super exciting. It's actually an endowment fund to make sure that 6 protected areas, and I should say 5 protected areas and a volunteer conservation area, actually have effective management forever. And those are areas that are owned by indigenous groups, and we're very excited to partner with them and make sure that, that they conserve their heritage. And so we'll be working with them. Endowment funds are one of the financial mechanisms that conservation trust funds have experience with. And it will be a pleasure to actually increase. One area that we're very excited is Chimalapas, which is one of the areas that has the highest biodiversity in Mexico. So we'll be telling you what we learned through this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. That sounds wonderful. So we're definitely looking forward to accompanying that. Zenka, this is a good segue for you because of your experience having led CTF like Costa Rica Forever and now working on project finance for permanence. And so many of these themes of institutionality, working with others, and scaling is very pertinent. How do you see the relationship between CTFs and PFPs in driving long-term scalable conservation impact?
Okay, thank you, Paulina, for the question. And thank you all. Good morning and good afternoon to all of you for joining us today. It's always great to be with the CTF family. As Adriana said, it is a family that continues to grow, and we're very proud to see how it continues to grow around the world. And thank you to the GF for being I would say the mother, the mother of all of this movement as well. And to see, Renee, how Mexico 30 by 30 really is an evolution and something that is born out of these efforts that we have all done in the past. And to see it all come together with the CTF leading this effort is really amazing as well. In terms of your question, Paulina, I'd like to say, definitely we see CTFs and PFPs as absolutely complementary. In fact, CTFs are the institutions that will carry on and implement any PFP work that we do. And definitely the PFPs can ensure large-scale conservation efforts are fully funded and that they're strategically executed. But we have also seen cases in which many of these PFPs have also helped create new CTFs. For example, we have a new CTF in Mongolia, which was created around Eternal Mongolia. We have a new CTF in Gabon, which was also created as part of the efforts that we are leading there. The CTF I ran for many years for Costa Rica was created as a result of the PFP as well. So there's complementarity. Sometimes the CTF will come first, and the CTF can actually be the one to run and create the process of the PFP. Sometimes the PFP itself, because it needs to be executed and implemented by a CTF, can help create new CTFs around the world and welcome new CTFs into our community. So I think that's one way in which we're absolutely complementary and we need each other to move forward, but also because PFPs can help accelerate impact. So in many cases, a CTF can benefit from having a PFP that gives it the funding, multi-year funding, committed to diverse sources that can allow it to carry through conservation projects. So there is also an advantage to for CTFs in having PFPs that can help them move many of these conservation objectives forward. For example, Fumbio has been managing the PFP for now almost 15 years, I believe. And that has allowed Fumbio through this PFP, ARPA for Life, to be able to actually commit to greater conservation efforts and impact in the Amazon. And so there's also a complementarity between these conservation trust funds and the PFP as a tool, because the PFP is nothing more than a tool that provides financial stability that can allow for these CTFs to actually achieve their impact at scale. And then the last thing I'll mention is that CTFs can also ensure financial resilience. And this is very important because and I know we'll talk about this a lot through this webinar, because one of the most important aspects of a CTF is that it remains throughout time. It has the capacity to endure through different government transitions, through different financial moments. And we see, for example, that this is really important for our work with PFPs. We see, for example, Herencia Colombia, which was a $130 million PFP that was signed 2 years ago in Colombia, but we see that, Fondo Patrimonio Patrimonio Natural being the CTF that runs the PFP there and has been there, of course, longer than the PFP, has the capacity to help bridge the gap between different government administrations, especially when the PFP was closed days before the change in government. And so we do see that there's enormous complementarity, that the PFP being a tool that CTFs can use to achieve their objectives, and the PFP also being a potential way to create new CTFs around the world and to help basically both PFPs and CTFs scale the potential of conservation impact in the places in which they work.
Thank you, Zenka. That's a great segue to Carl as a good example of how you're using different tools to work with others. In particular, the Mulanje Mountain Conservation Trust is a local conservation trust fund that's immersed with a local community. So how do you feel that, or have seen that CTFs ensure that inclusivity and equitable benefits to Indigenous peoples and local communities, particularly in large-scale projects?
Okay, thank you. And I'd just like to say to everyone, buenos dias and bonjour and good day from the warm heart of Africa here in Malawi. Mount Mulanje, where I'm at, is the opposite end of the scale, really, to some of the projects that have been or the work being described. We are a 500 square kilometer area surrounded by 500,000 people within 20 kilometers. So it gives you a bit of an idea of our kind of setting. We're remote and we're local. We're very far away, and we're in one of the, I would say, the most impoverished countries in the world, and really do suffer from harsh climate shocks. So the GEF capitalized endowment that we received some time back has really given us some resilience to continue to offer support and involvement to the communities around here. How do we involve them? It's much easier at a local scale, even if there's a lot of people. We obviously have local community leadership in our governance, and that's been critical through now well over 75 governance meetings since the year 2000. So everyone has a say at a high level. But when we started off, we were geared to being more a biodiversity conservation instrument. And we realized very quickly that, in fact, although wildfires and invasives and issues like that were difficult ones to address, we could do that in time. But the most important factor was the grand social contract of involving as many people around the mountain to be involved, participating, and in a sense owning the mountain. It is a government protected area, but it suffers from mismanagement, and most of the forest reserves around us are already completely deforested. So the fact that we still have this unique ecology here is amazing. We have plus or minus 500 unique species in this very small area, and some of them only occupy 1 or 2 square kilometers. So it just shows just how vulnerable this is. One of the first things we did was to, looking at the management issue, was to build a new management capacity by involving community groups all around the mountain. So today at Mount Mulanje, the community groups carry out all the management action. All of it completely is done by community groups. A lot of them have been verified, trained, certified by government agencies and others, but all the action is carried out by them. So not only are they benefiting financially, but they also are very much involved in all the work, whether it's ongoing management or whether it's restoration on the mountain. And we're talking about thousands of people that are being involved. So beyond that, as I say, the social contract means that we have to look at the resources of the mountain and see how can people benefit from this in order to ensure that impoverishment, lack of access to resources, and what we've seen more recently, brutal cyclones coming in and really destroying people's livelihoods and homesteads. How do we kind of offer an alternative? So that's where we started, using some good finance to build an electricity company that now does supply a lot of people with power. We looked at the water availability to see how we could expand the biggest green business around the mountain here, the tea farming through the estate sector to smallholders. And that was a good win-win cooperation with local commerce. So we look for these gaps. We are taking natural source-based IGAs to a new level. We have some funding from a new cooperative fund that Bridge is managing to set up a factory. And we hope that with that being completed soon, we will again be able to offer a livelihood difference, again, to scale. And I put this, even though we're local, it's to scale. We have resisted tourism investments and various others because they tend to only involve a few people. So we've looked very specifically at how we can benefit a lot of people through innovative finance mechanisms. So that's how we do it. And our last area that's really been critical and I think has engaged us is this year we have submitted to UNESCO for consideration of a World Heritage Site here, but fascinatingly as an intangible cultural landscape of universal significance, an intangible cultural landscape. So this really has engaged us with how everybody around the mountain sees the mountain as important in their lives. So it's hopefully going to be an exciting, positive process for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. That's exciting and a fascinating process. I'd love to learn more. And Adrienne, I'm going to go back to you because I think that's a good segue on how the CTF really becomes a catalyzer. And so the report itself does highlight the catalytic role of CTFs in leveraging other funding. Could you elaborate a little bit more on GEF's approach to working with CTFs as financial hubs for scaling biodiversity funding and leveraging other funders?
Yes, thank you, Paulina, and great examples by Carl right now, how, even these partnerships and, very impressive how a small CTF local can harness at scale the value of these partnerships. So this is exactly at the core of the GEF strategy, the stability, the resilience, and the long-term vision of CTFs. It's very important for the financing strategy of the GEF because it brings a perspective that goes beyond the usual project cycle of 4, 5, 6 years, one project done, next project. So this is actually the anchor. And that's why I say I started my first intervention talking about institution building. And another point that was mentioned that I think it's of particular importance is governance. The governance of the CTF, but also the governance of projects. Because usually, for example, the GEF is a country-driven mechanism. Okay, we have a pool of donors and recipient countries, more than 183 countries. And they have different strategies, different demands. So we pull this together, we divide the strategy, and we deploy the resources on the ground. And in this sense, organizations such as CTFs are critical for the impact of these investments, but also the sustainability of these investments. And we are getting examples here from this overall global vision and how it is deployed on the ground. And now, we're talking a lot about the new theme in vogue in the MDB world, the multilateral agenda now is what we call country platforms, or pooling of different investors and donors in each country together. It's usually led by the IMF and the World Bank, this kind of dialogue. And I'm involved in that right now. And I was like, oh, but we have been doing it for a long time in the biodiversity world to CTFs. And that's exactly it. because usually when we do a project, we request co-financing, and we actually pool the resources, and they can come at different times along the process, and that's one of the beauties of the PFPs. You have this coming together of the different institutions, and being them multilateral, like the GEF and other multilateral funds, bilaterals, like the country to country, and the government, of course, it's very important, the national governments, and also the private sector. I love this example that Carl just gave us of working with the local private sector, and so this is extremely important at all levels. But I really want to highlight that at the center of any, what we call this in the jargon is co-financing, but it's much more than co-financing, because you build an alliance, you build a network, and this is over years. It takes a lot of time to build these things, and that's why we say we already have country platforms for biodiversity, and at the core of these funding platforms, we have the CTFs as the reliable partner, the on-the-ground partner, the partner that keeps the dialogue when you have like the missions or the visits or the come and going of funders, and even coming and going of governments. And that's why I think this stability and this long-term vision is key to the achievements. And I have seen in my experience the impact of this. Maybe, we sometimes are, when we see these very large operations by World Bank, IMF, the regional development banks in Africa, Asia, and we think that we are far behind in the amount of funds that we have for biodiversity. But I would say, I will argue that the steady, continuous building up, little by little, we are achieving big impacts. And what Carl just told us, what Renee just mentioned to us, Zdenka, in terms of what we are building, I would say this is very solid. How can you think about institutions that are now celebrating 30 years, 25 years? These are real assets in terms of this whole strategy. That's why the GEF believes so much in this partnership. And for us, Invest is a very positive investment in terms of harnessing all this co-financing and creating these long-term funding platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. And that's really vital. A few things that you've said there on the pooling of funds, and also I'm going to latch on to the one thing you said about demonstrating the impact, and shift to Renee, because that is such an important element of the work that you're doing. And in the report, as we were putting it together, it was both an opportunity and a challenge, because there's so many results of CTFs, and monitoring and evaluation of conservation impact continue to be a persistent challenge over the years, and it is broadly in the conservation community overall. Yet it's essential to demonstrate those results and to know how the investments of long-term funding is actually demonstrated on the ground. So it'd be great to hear from you how Fondo Mexicano is working to strengthen its impact monitoring systems, especially tracking changes in ecosystems, wildlife outcomes. Are there any new tools or approaches that are being explored to make that monitoring more systematic and at scale, and also not with a high cost?
Thank you, Paulina, and very inspiring, Adriana, just to see that, we have this ecosystem of different funds connecting with donors, and just making this ecosystem that's required for financing biodiversity. And in terms of monitoring, time is an essential element, as you all know. And through the years, we have gone from tracking financial aspects. It's very important to know where your money is. So there's software that usually ERPs that actually are used for that. Then performance, and a lot of us have, just follow up on the grants we actually give, just where, how many people, where, what's the surface that's being impacted. And then comes impact, but impact takes time. And there's many tools and now many toys that are coming out that are very exciting. Paulina, you know that with the MORE Foundation, we actually explore different methodologies and, the different commissions in Mexico that deal with biodiversity, the Forestry Commission, the Protected Areas Commission, and the Biodiversity Commission. They sat together to actually devise some methodologies for tracking both, plants and animals in the field. And what happened was that it was very costly. And so we had to actually tone it down, many levels, and then look for community monitoring. Once the communities were involved, it just was a feast. It just took off. And so, it's not only that you get data and data that are surprisingly very reliable, but also the fact that people show pride. The children are like monitoring the water in the rivers or the soils in the fields. And then, it becomes sort of a school field trip, and also it becomes the involvement of a whole community. And once you start looking at the data, especially trap cameras, which are, a real amazing thing, once you start like seeing all the animals that are like coming out at night and all that, then you start looking at trends. And then if you put together that with remote sensing, which nowadays is not as expensive as it used to be, then you can track whether really your investments are having an impact or not. The Independent Office for Evaluation at the GF made some studies of protected areas that had GF funding and those that didn't. And it turned out that, there was a 23% decrease of deforestation in those that had funding. For me, that is just amazing. Another example, in the Monarch Butterfly Reserve, already for 25 years, we've been following, communities, working with 34 communities, many of them indigenous groups, some of them not indigenous. And, this social fabric with 35 different organizations working there. World Wildlife Fund is actually just doing the satellite imagery every year. And what we find is at the beginning, when we started with the conservation, in 2000, deforestation went up. But then it not only went to zero, but it actually now we are very happy to say that the core area of the Biosphere Reserve for the monarch butterflies is now recovering. So, but if we had just funded for a few years, and the funder had just 3 years, that would have been a complete failure. So it just takes time to build the social network, and monitoring is a very important tool, especially today, to make it very visual and just show that there's progress.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Renee. That's inspiring to hear, and I love the citizen science angle of that. I'm going to shift to thank again, from the lessons of your work with CTFs, what would be your recommendation to new or emerging funds looking to contribute to the Global Biodiversity Fund framework? And as you mentioned earlier, such as PFPs being supporting to create new funds, but also the existing funds. Wonderful to hear your lessons from that experience.
Yeah, thank you, Paulina. And of course, we have a huge challenge, all of us, in terms of meeting the goals of the Global Biodiversity Fund. But we have also so much to offer as a conservation trust fund movement. And first, I'd like to mention, one thing conservation trust funds bring, and one of the big lessons is financial stability. And I think you just mentioned it, Renee, in your comments. It takes time. It takes time to then be able to monitor the impact and to monitor results. And so financial sustainability, to be able to do this throughout time is very important. So having long-term financial mechanisms as part of the CTFs. That's the magic, Adriana, as you mentioned, that makes these CTFs resilient over time. And so a stable financial base can enable some of this lasting impact. Second, I think, Adriana, something you mentioned that's really relevant is strong governance and having multi-stakeholder boards. This is really part of the practice standards also for the CTFs, making sure you have government, civil society, indigenous groups, private sector. All of this will ensure credibility and transparency especially in shifting political environments. So it's a very important lesson learned, I think, for many of the conservation trust funds to really work on having strong governance and strong capacity, therefore, to react to the stakeholders, the governments, et cetera. Third, I think really important is diversifying our funding sources. And the report in that white paper, one of the aspects I really like of that white paper is how it describes also how conservation trust funds really have been at the forefront of leveraging impact investments and carbon credits and biodiversity offsets and public-private partnerships. And in part, this has been possible because conservation trust funds have the capacity to be flexible, to move and explore. Now we have, I know some of you here are working with Bridge, but really the opportunity to innovate. And innovation is going to be key to reach these global biodiversity framework goals. And the fact that conservation trust funds have a size that allows them to innovate is really important, going beyond the traditional grants. In fact, if you look at the information in the white paper I was reviewing once again last night, is the traditional philanthropic funding is halfway down in the list of things that conservation trust funds are using to finance their activities. So that's really interesting that it hasn't been donor dependent for most of the conservation trust funds. So really trying to diversify the funding sources is very important. And then I'd like to mention what you mentioned, Renee, which is so important: monitoring and evaluation. How do we continue to show impact of the work that we do? That is so important and so relevant. And I know that there's conservation trust funds like Fondo Mexicano, Renee, that has done enormous progress in doing this, but we need to come together as a conservation trust fund movement to monitor, to continue to find better ways to monitor our impact, and have the system tracking tools that allow us to do that as well. And finally, but most importantly, prioritize community engagement. I think from the examples that you gave, Carl, and the example you just gave, Renee, for example, around citizen engagement, citizen science, it really does take Indigenous and local communities to really move this process forward, and engaging them in the work that we do is so relevant. And so CTF should actively invest in community capacity building as well. So I think all in all, basically the lessons learned is it takes a village to do conservation to really have an impact, and CTFs that have the capacity to convene all of that village, all of the different actors in making this happen. So, and having the financial sustainability to carry it out through time. Thank you, Paulina.
Thank you, Zenka. Carl, going back to you, and a good segue on this point of innovation, as Zenka says, many CTFs are innovating quite a bit, and we've heard from Renee on how they adapted, including this community engagement and the monitoring and so forth. So how do you think innovation is critical in achieving those biodiversity goals, especially in contexts where limited resources, limited local expertise continue to be a major challenge in places across Africa, not just Malawi, as you mentioned earlier. So how do you see that CTFs and other stakeholders could really be the mechanisms to enhance sustainable financing, such as biodiversity offsets, carbon credits, and impact investments, and to address some of these socioeconomic barriers?
Thank you, and thank you for that question. Yes, alongside Fondo Mexicano, we've been around for 25 years. We've tried many different approaches. We've worked with many organizations, many communities, many leaders around here in trying to seek out solutions that assist us to benefit conservation, but also benefit the communities. And our sort of triple win approach is looking for those linkages between conservation, community, and then commerce, and how commerce underwrites that in a sustainable way. And then the nexus of all of that is this kind of wonderful appreciation that now you're you're getting somewhere because you're finding solutions. We have been involved in carbon work in the past. It didn't work out very well for us. I think we are still recalibrating and rethinking that one. It's not easy, but we were a very early carbon trader around biomass efficient cook stoves. The difference they made in the community was the most important thing, and that continues. And community groups continue to produce biomass efficient cook stoves. Now we've taken up to the next level on our independent power producer, that there's electric cookers that we're now putting in under a carbon program, and Atmosphere in Germany has been really good there. So we're always looking for these links, these partnerships. I think recently we wanted to be a bit more involved in something that was a bit more to scale. We always are sort of deemed to be like, working at a very small scale. We were fortunate after a lot of big work to get listed up in Nature March, April this year, to register a new ecoregion, the Southeast African Montane Archipelago, a really comprehensive piece of work between ourselves here in Malawi and our colleagues across the border in Mozambique, which is right next door to us here, and a lot of international scientists that really put a lot of work into this. And this is an ecoregion that gets launched with, a threatened status. So what do we do about that? We can't sit with this. So what MMCT has done, and we're supported by the US Forest Service, and we're supported by African Parks, to recalibrate ourselves in an organization to, in the first place, look at seeking out the management concession for the mountain. So we're changing from being a support organization to being a management agency. We haven't got that 100% yet sorted out, but this is a step forward as we see how we can better use the resources, cooperate with Nature Conservancy around developing a big water fund here, looking at all these exciting initiatives, both biodiversity-based, but also natural resource-based, and seek out that opportunity. And reaching out across the border to a fellow conservation trust fund, Biofund in Mozambique, that we work with in the mountains that are just across the border in this new ecoregion. So here we have a synergy between CTFs, one on a national scale that Biofund is, much bigger than us, and another one, but we're at the local level here where we can give a positive anchor, and our relationship with Biofund is great, and we both have our strengths to bring here, and all our experiences to share across the border as we walk, as we go forward. So yes, we look more and more for these impact investments because we see how that can benefit with resilience many more people in future. And we're finalizing a power purchase agreement for our independent power producer, which will take us up to 6.5 megawatts and an additional 25,000 households. I mean, that catalytic investment is incredible, and we're looking forward to launching that pretty soon. So these are the kind of initiatives that are possible through these grand partnerships that we talk about, and we've learned about all of this through the partnerships that CAFE, as our network, has enabled us to share and benefit from, but also by coming and benefiting from REDLAC and the organizations there. We've been to Fondo Mexicana General Assemblies and Forever Costa Rica as General Assembly. So we've shared a lot of ideas, and this is really catalytic in then taking the risks and developing the ventures that we have done. So we look forward to doing more and more of this in future.
Thank you, Carl. And we're running close to time, so I'm going to use my facilitator's purview to have one more question for Adriana and I'll revert to a couple of questions that we've received from participants in the chat. Adriana, I think what Carl just said about that exchanging of knowledge through those networks, wonderful to hear from you how these sort of fostering partnerships are vital to GEF and how you see moving forward the work with Red Lat Cafe and AppNet playing a vital role in that financial architecture for the future. You're on mute, Adriana.
Very quickly, Paulina, thank you. And I'm very excited about this partnership that we are moving forward with the networks, the existing networks and the future networks. I think one of the objectives of this whole work is also to bring more visibility to CTFs, because globally there's been so many discussions on how to funnel funds on the ground with the CBD discussions, and we want to see and help position the CTFs as partners of choice for a multilateral financing mechanism, bilateral financing mechanism, philanthropies, exactly because of the aspects we've discussed today: stability, long-term vision, governance, local institutions, as partners for these investments. We're talking about doubling, tripling the investments on biodiversity, and where we should put this, our answer is CTFs, because of all the elements we discussed today. So in short, we want to help raise the visibility. We want to make a challenge to the CTFs. We think you guys need to, the regional networks are growing great. We need strengthening more the regional network in Asia Pacific. We are talking about that. Why not create a global alliance? Because I think the CTFs should play a more prominent role in all these dialogues, from the global to the regional to the local dialogues. And the GEF is here to whatever we can do to support, raise this visibility and raise this partnership and engage the CTFs in the fora. One of the examples of how we actually doing this was a very successful GEF CTF joint pavilion that we have at the CBD COP. That was one of the most important hubs of the COP, I should say, in Cali, very popular. So that's the kind of things we want to foster this dialogue and to really increase the visibility of these very important, wonderful institutions we have created, and welcoming the new ones that Enduring Earth is fostering. That's amazing. So I really think this is a force for nature. The CTFs are a force for nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. I'm going to shift to a couple of questions that have come in the chat and see who would like to address them. Any insights from the report or from your experience really on how CTFs can help mobilize domestic resources for conservation and climate? A few of you have mentioned how that works in really unlocking resources with the government and in-country resources. Anything you'd like to specifically add for that question? Renee.
Yeah, I'm just building on what Zdenka said about, just creating this community, this this collective effort that it's just, taking different examples from everywhere. So I think what CTFs offer you is just like a complete tools from all sorts of different financial mechanisms. And when you have that social strength of just putting everybody together, the partnerships that Carl was mentioning, then that brings the domestic, appropriateness. And then they really get involved. So if you show, for example, what we have drawn from is from Fumbio, we take a lot of like the tools on monitoring, but we take also from Fondo Acción carbon credits, or we take from Marfunds insurance. And when you bring all that global knowledge, that village that Zdenka was talking about, and you present that to your domestic partners, they want to be part of it. So it's kind of, just saying, this is happening all over the world. It's happening here and there, and you have the examples, and you have those partnerships. Then they really want to be, brought in. And that's how sometimes you have to go all over the world to bring home, the pride and the buy-in to actually be part of this movement.
Thank you, Renee.
Alina, can I share something?
Yes, go ahead, Zdenka.
I just wanted to mention also on this lessons learned, one lesson we've learned, because part of building the PFP is actually looking at ways in which we can increase domestic funding. But one thing we've learned is how to speak the language of the governments when you're trying to raise and mobilize domestic funding. Is you are not speaking a lot of our conservation language, you're speaking from a socioeconomic perspective. And so I think part of the lessons learned is also understanding how to make a case for governments through socioeconomic impact analysis and preparing the information in a way that is more compelling to governments than just the typical way in which we're convinced that conservation itself is worth it, but when you speak to governments. And so I think there's lots of lessons learned and examples that can be used as to how these socioeconomic analysis are being presented to governments around the world to inspire them to actually support in mobilizing more domestic resources. So that's another lesson learned. I just wanted to make sure we put it in there because I think it's been one we've learned over the years as well.
Yeah, extremely important one, especially speaking to other sectors in the government beyond environment. I think we have time for one more question from Roger, which is, I think, a very pertinent basic question that perhaps several of our participants are wondering. How can entities not currently involved with conservation trust funds seek opportunities for getting involved? Anyone would like to tackle that one?
I can take it on.
Yeah, go ahead, Zdenka.
I can start. And I think, Adriana, you made a reference to this, and Renee, there are networks of conservation trust funds, REDLAC for Latin America and the Caribbean, but also I think, REDLAC working around the world as well. There is CAFE, which works in Africa. There is the emerging AppNet for Asia. And all of most of the conservation trust funds are related to these networks. And these networks have a series or have produced a series of practices and standards to help build, what does it actually take to have a conservation trust fund? What are the best practices? And there is so much knowledge within these networks. So my advice would be go directly to these networks. I know Daniela from REDLAC is here with us today. And so go directly to those networks and seek advice from them as to how to make, how these have been created. All CTFs have different history. Some have been created through, specific projects, others through PFPs, others, have emerged out of direct interest from governments. And so there's a history to each one of them. And so connecting and understanding the history of other conservation trust funds is useful in creating new ones.
Yes, and just to add, I think that's very important also to strengthen these networks and my challenge of creating a global coalition of the networks, because this is actually the need to increase the visibility, because the innovation is there and we don't, it's this positioning as partners of choice. There is a lot that the global funders do not know about CTFs. And take a look also at our publication. We really want to disseminate the publication because we made it in a very, jargon-free and light reading as much as possible, really to attract attention and to position these institutions as in the role that they are already playing, and they can be much enhanced as partners on the ground for any funder. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. And we're unfortunately out of time. I've pulled over so many valuable lessons from this that we will follow up on, and many questions that we've gotten. I do want to recognize Jorge Oviedo, who is also on the line with us, the president of REDLAC. colleagues from CAFE and hopefully colleagues from Asia. Thank you, Jorge, also for making this possible, and Daniela from REDLAC and Maria Luisa. This has been extremely enlightening and inspiring as we kick off a year that is going to be both opportunities but challenges as well. And Osmani, I did see your question about the challenges with the current administration, if that might affect the GEF funding. We'll have to get back on you. Maybe we'll prepare another webinar to continue the dialogue on these very important topics. Thank you so much to the panelists. I'm looking forward to seeing you all in person at some point this year and continue the good fight of getting conservation done on the ground. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Thank
Merci.
you.
Muito obrigada. Great.
Muito
Thank you so
obrigada.
much. Congratulations. Great work. Great job in Malawi, Cal. Thank you so much. It's endearing to hear 25 years later that the GEF has made such a difference. That's great.
Let's talk more. Let's talk more.
Yes, let's talk more. Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.